Please be upstanding to receive the Mayor of Waverley, Councillor John Ward.
Good evening, councillors, and good evening, visitors and those who are watching us from afar. Before we formally start our meeting, I'd like to call on the Reverend Simon Taylor to lead us in some interesting reflections. Simon.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Councillor John Ward, the Mayor, and all Waverley councillors. Thank you once again for the invitation to be here with you. It's lovely to be with you. I know that you've had a meeting today with some friends from nearby, and actually, as some of you know, I'm the rector of Busbridge and Hambledon Church. It's on the hill here in Godalming, and we ourselves are looking at parallel structuring with the church in the town here in Godalming, and we're going to be doing that over the next year and bringing ourselves into the very town itself. And perhaps Godalming may be one day able to legally call itself a Minster town with all the advantages that brings for tourism. But in the meantime, I feel like I have definitely done my civic duty for the entire century today, because I've currently come literally hot foot an hour ago from preaching in the House of Parliament. And I thought I won't give you the sermon I gave there, but I will give you an anecdote, if I may, because I know it's a story and then a prayer, and I won't inflict the Lord's Prayer on you because you've been good behaviour people. I'd like to tell you that I have three sons. My eldest son is about to go with the England football team as part of the England bubble to win the World Cup, of course. He's not playing, he's in social media, and he's going to be very interested in the cameras. He absolutely detests football, much to the disappointment of my middle son, who would love to be a professional footballer and knows all the statistics and scores of all players and their names, whereas my eldest son doesn't even know who the manager is. So my middle son is very, very upset, as I shared earlier today, with my eldest son, because he's interested in the football, cameras, football. My youngest son loves culture, loves different cultures, loves different environments. So he would love to go simply for that. So you've got one situation and yet three perspectives. You can see where this is going. One situation, yet three perspectives. And the Bible says when you have those moments of difference, yes, it's good to argue, but also we do so with justice, mercy, and wisdom. And thank you for being people of justice, mercy, and wisdom. And if you know a way to get all three of my sons to the World Cup, I'd be most appreciative, because then I can act with justice, mercy, and wisdom. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, thank you that you are the God of justice, that you ask us to act with mercy towards all people, and that you will now give all who gather here, your representatives, wisdom. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you very much, Simon. You're welcome to stay for an interesting meeting, but if you have anything else to go to, then we will say goodbye to you and thank you. Gentlemen, ladies, please be seated. Welcome everybody to this meeting of Waverley Borough Council. For anybody that doesn't know me, my name is John Ward and I am the Mayor and obviously will be chairing this meeting. Obviously, members, you are well acquainted with the procedure. Please raise your hand if you wish to speak. You obviously operate your own microphones. We are live streaming the meeting, so the public are watching you. And please, although you have 4 minutes, please don't see that as a target. Let's try and be as brief as we can, avoid repetition. And as I was asked at the last meeting, can we please try and speak into our microphones so that those whose hearing is not as good as some others can actually participate fully in the meeting. Move on to item 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Apologies for absence have been received from councillors David Beeman, Roger Blishan, Steve Cossa, Jerome Davidson, Sally Dixon, Brian Edmonds, Maxine Gale, George Hess, Daniel Hunt, Robert Knowles, Penny Marriott, Peter Marriott, Julia Potts, Anne-Marie Rossman and Michaela Wicks.
Thank you very much. Item 2 is the minutes of the council meeting held on the 19th of July and the extraordinary meeting held on the 26th of September this year. Does any member have an issue with the accuracy of the minutes which have laid on the table for the requisite time? Councillor Seaman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With reference to the minutes for the 26th of September, minute 33.6 on page 22 of our papers, have a point of accuracy in the wording. The minute states that the council would maintain a right to seek independent financial or legal advice on a case-by-case basis. If you check the recording of that meeting, you will find that the leader actually said, "We at all times maintain the right to seek independent legal advice, either on finance or legal matters." So can I propose that the words financial or be deleted from the minute, because this is not what the leader said. This is relevant because the question that the response referred to specifically mentioned the SIPFA proposal for the Section 151 officer to have access to independent financial advice. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
My memory is not that clear on that. Leader, do you have a comment?
I'm afraid mine isn't either, and I'd need to go and watch the webcast to confirm one way or the other. Was this note to change the minutes received in advance to officers to confirm one way or the other?
No, it wasn't. Due to holidays and house hunting, I'd only got round to reading my papers at the last minute, so I apologise for that. The words are taken verbatim from the recording of the meeting, though.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Seaborn. We will ask the officers after the meeting to listen to the recording, and if, as I'm sure you being an honest chap, if you are correct, then we will amend them accordingly. Apart from that, is there any other query with the minutes? And taking that on board, is it your wish that I sign them both as an accurate record? Thank you very much. Okay, let's go on to item 3. Declarations of interest. Louise.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No declarations have been received before the meeting.
Councillors, any last minute declarations? Thank you very much. Apologies. Items 4, Mayor's announcements. As you've probably seen from the councillors' notes, I've been fairly busy, but I'm going to be careful and obey my own instruction of brevity. I've been to things like Talk Surrey, which had their AGM, and they are very, very keen on helping people with a thing called aphasia, which is loss of power of speech after brain damage. And I learned an awful lot about them. Farnham Assist had postponed their earlier church service due to the hot weather, and they had it last week. Interestingly, St. Matthew's Gospel, the sheep and the goats, I have now read that lesson in 3 different churches in the last 2 months, so it seems to be a popular choice for some reason. I went to King Edward's School in Whitley for their admissions day, and I have to say it was an amazing affair. At half term, before they go home, all the new pupils go up and are formally admitted, having met with a governor and promised to be good people. And they're handed a little sort of scroll type thing, admitting them to the school. Apparently it's been going for 300 years, this ceremony, and I was really impressed. Their patron, HRH, the Duchess of Gloucester, was there as well. And it was really a splendid affair. So I will not bore you to death with any more, because anything else you can read in the Mayor's notes. So we will move on at speed to the leaders and portfolio holders announcements. And I do ask you, particularly those who like to talk a little longer, to please try and emulate me, if not shorter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening and good evening, members. You will, I'm sure, be pleased to know that I do not intend to talk all night in this slot. I do not wish to get sanction from the Mayor in the process of doing so either. I would like to just open this evening by offering my congratulations to two individuals specifically. The first is Councillor Julia McShane of our collaboration partner, Guildford Borough Council, who was elected the leader of that council in their last session. I'm fairly sure this will be the first time in the history of Guildford and Waverley Borough Councils that two council estate kids have led those two authorities. And that's just something that has meant a lot to me to reflect upon over the last few weeks and certain priorities that these two councils have together. The second set of congratulations is to the MP for South West Surrey, the Right Honourable Jeremy Hunt MP, who was appointed to one of the great offices of state this week, Chancellor of the Exchequer. His job in many respects is a difficult one, although as a starter for 10, undoing what the last guy did was a fair start and quite an easy thing to do. I will be writing to him in support of a number of things that this council has already stated on a number of occasions. I will be asking the new Chancellor if he still supports business rates reform. I shall be asking the new Chancellor if he supports much needed local government funding reform. And I shall be asking the new Chancellor if he is content to serve in a government that is overtly and notoriously pro-fracking. Let us hope that the government can now move on from their own internal dramas to actually addressing the issues in this country. I shall probably be joining Councillor Williams in a campaign against the use of single-use chancellors going forward, and I'm hoping that we can now have a stable enough government that councils like this one can actually plan more than 1 year in advance and get on with the business of helping people and residents with things like the cost of living crisis, helping Ukrainian refugees, and making sure that we provide warm, sustainable and comfortable homes and keep within our budget in this council. I want to thank all of our teams who have continued that work despite these pressures. And particularly, I want to thank and to welcome the new joint executive heads of service who have taken responsibility over significant areas of policy and governance within both Guildford Borough Council and Waverley Borough Council. And as leader of this council, to formally welcome them into their posts. And they took office from October. This has obviously been part of our collaboration programme, which is exactly for saving money for both authorities, but also to try and drive efficiencies in both Guildford and Waverley and to actually provide better services for residents. Now, it's on that note, Mr. Mayor, I will stop talking and hand over to the rest of the executive to talk about specific business of Waverley Borough Council. And thank you for your indulgence in regards to the national picture. And I move to Councillor Clark to carry on.
Thank you, Leader. Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, members. I'd just like to take a couple of minutes to say a few words about our customer services. Some time ago, in one of my previous portfolio holder updates, I mentioned that in our new customer services department, they had access to a new centralised customer database called Citizen Hub. This had been put together by merging all of the other various databases around the council. In September, this has now been taken one step further by integrating our Liberty Converse telephony system to the Citizen Hub. This means that when a resident calls in, if the system recognises the telephone number of the caller, it will automatically bring up the customer record with any existing or historical information and transactions already contained within any of the databases. This progress will allow our customer service agents to quickly create a case report for the customer. And if the resident calls again, the agent will have instant access to all the historical or background information. I would also like to take this opportunity to mention that just recently, I was given an impressive demonstration of our new digital complaints management system, which has been developed entirely in-house by our business transformation and digital teams. This module will integrate with Citizen Hub and will automate many of the manual and laborious steps that are usually taken to record, initiate, and resolve customer complaints. Now, no organisation likes to receive complaints, but it is the measure of a good organisation how quickly and effectively their complaints are dealt with. So with the new fully digital system, the time taking to bring complaints to a resolution will be improved and performance reports will feed into management to ensure that they do so. I look forward to reporting back to Council when the system has been tested and has gone live. And in the meantime, I'd just like to thank the members of the team who have put in so much hard work in this project so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can keep my report very short on this occasion, you'll be pleased to hear. Council will recall that Richard Holmwood, one of our head of services, was conducting a review of enforcement activity across the whole council in planning, licensing and housing and so on. That was suspended actually due to the uncertainty about who would be in the new joint management team. But Richard has now been appointed as head of regulatory services, and he will be planning to restart that review. He obviously has to discuss that with Don Hyde, the new executive director that he reports to. And this will include a report left behind by the previous head of planning, a draft report on improvements in planning enforcement. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Leader. Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everybody. As you may recall, I've spoken before about the mid-year review of our general fund medium-term financial plan that's underway. Even though this review started in a climate of profound uncertainty, more recent macroeconomic developments have dragged us down to a whole new level completely. Much as I'm tempted to, I'll avoid grumbling now about libertarian jihadists and the like. Now's not the time. Our newest Chancellor has described the problems facing his public finances as eye-watering, and we can at least hope that he can start now to appreciate how the rest of us feel. Because like our residents and everyone else in this country, we're also facing a situation where our own cost pressures from inflationary and other market forces are running farther and faster ahead of any measures, benefits, and tools that are currently available to us to keep up. I'm afraid it should also come as no surprise that our one-off capital project contractors are also experiencing the same inflationary and supply chain pressures as everyone else. And we're already seeing that impact on tender returns and costings coming from them. In some cases, these pressures are severe enough to threaten the feasibility of projects that had previously looked secure, including not only new infrastructure, but also important upgrades to our existing facilities. I expect this will be a concern not only for projects that we are wholly funding ourselves, but also for those that are being funded from other sources, including CIL. If officers are updating the feasibility assessments of our own projects and where possible seeking additional funding to try to ensure that they can still go ahead. If necessary and available, alternative options will be considered. While the mid-year review of the MTFP update is due to come to ONS in about 3 weeks, that's a very long time at the moment. But by then we should have some more clarity on whatever else the Chancellor has in store for us. Whatever that is, it may already be too late for too many, and we can only hope it won't be too little as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Merriweather. Councillor Mirrlees.
Thank you, Leader. Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everybody. Leisure centres. We're currently out to tender for a new operator for the leisure centres, and we have a number of interested parties, so hopeful for competitive returns in early November. Progress continues on Cranley Leisure Centre, and we're appointing a design team for the new build next month. All the centres are recovering from the fallout of COVID, with usage increasing to about 80%. But the new challenge is energy costs, and we are talking to our contractor at the moment. With regard to the museum at Farnham, the MEN 2 application has been made to repair the Wilmer House facade in which the museum sits, and the outcome of this will be known in March 2023. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Mirrlees. Councillor Paul Rivers.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you in advance for everybody else who's listening. On behalf of Housing Maintenance, and after many years, I'm pleased to report excellent progress on the rebuilding of the wall at Vernon Court. And I thank Robert Killick for his updates and for his very interesting pictures, which I am very happy to share with anybody after this meeting who wants to see how it is done and get an idea of why it took so long as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Leader.
Councillor Rivers. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Leader. Firstly, I would like to congratulate the Economic Development team for being shortlisted out of 400 submissions at last Friday's Federation for Small Business Local Government Awards for our COVID-19 support and recovery. There was strong competition and we were thrilled to be included in the top entries. We have received congratulations from the FSP team and on behalf of the local SMEs, which are the backbone of our local economy. They have benefited from our support during the height of the pandemic and afterwards as well. Our response to help businesses survive the pandemic began with swift payment of government and local financial support, processing of grants and effective signposting to help them to continue to operate and support their staff. We also promoted high streets and the local economy to consumers, continuing to bolster them as lockdowns began to ease. Work continues today to build a robust business community through networking opportunities, training and mentoring, as well as bringing more investment and footfall into the area where we can. This is a huge achievement for the small team we have here in Waverley and very much deserved by them. So I think I'd like to obviously join the rest of the council in thanking them for their hard work. It's true that times are still incredibly hard for our businesses and community organisations as well. And we are continuing to target our support to ensure that we help to provide every opportunity for them to survive this economic turmoil. We are working very hard to distribute more funding across the borough to provide what assistance we can. I would also like to thank my planning, development and policy teams for all their hard work over the past 12 months. We have Local Plan Part 2 still going through, and you know that there have been difficulties within the planning service. However, I can assure the council that although this can be a very difficult role, I'm confident that our team, with the additional support we have planned, has the qualities and experience to continue to improve and build this service over the next year. I'm also delighted to announce that the work on the access road to the new Dunsfold Park Garden Village has now commenced, which is really great news. Later on in the agenda, we have the Climate Change and Sustainability SPD. I would just like to say at this point that as I've said before several times, you know, the government abandoned the Code for Sustainability, for Sustainable Homes rather, back in 2015. And had that been put in place, we would be seeing homes built to far better environmental standards than we have now. New homeowners may well be in a very different place as well with regard to spiralling energy bills and also with reducing their carbon emissions as well. Even more worrying, as the leaders mentioned as well, this government has torn up its manifesto pledge on fracking and plunged our planet deeper into climate crisis. And like the leader, I'll be very interested to see how our new Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, now responds on this point. This administration has made considerable steps towards achieving our carbon neutrality action plan led by Councillor Williams. We are committed to reducing our energy usage and emissions across all of our services. The Climate Change and Sustainability SPD is another step forward on this journey to help protect the environment for now and for future generations. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend, and finally, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Leader. And I'm just picking up on the comments from Councillor Townsend, which I heartily endorse. It is a tragedy that this government is actually banning, is lifting the ban on fracking and encouraging fracking in areas such as Southwest Surrey. And I hope that our local MP who stood with me on the common land at Dunsfold will actually sort of remember some of his commitments now that he moves into the echelons of government. But picking up the point that the leader made, that we now have another single-use chancellor, I am reminded of the fact that that our local MP has asserted his commitment to the environment, and he seems to be practicing that in terms of reuse rather than recycling. And certainly there is a reuse, I think, of the George Osborne playbook in terms of the in terms of the unfolding plans for yet another round of austerity cuts, and austerity cuts caused by the chaos created by his predecessor. Yeah, you know, and in order to pay for that chaos, in order to pay for not removing the cap on bankers' bonuses, which I think is rather sad.
Can I get you to stick a little closer to the subject?
So while this is happening and the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, we have a climate crisis. We have a climate crisis, and we are doing our best to tackle it, even if the government is asleep at the wheel. So, for example, the Memorial Hall decarbonisation plan. Yes, I'm coming to a conclusion. The Memorial Hall decarbonisation plan is now complete. The air source heat pumps have been installed, and that's saving 17 tonnes of carbon emissions per annum. We have just started the process of unfolding for the first time in Waverley, an ethical and sustainable procurement policy, and it went to the Climate Emergency Board in draft a week ago. There's ongoing work in progress in terms of decarbonising our leisure centres, and Councillor Mirrlees has talked about the plans for a decarbonised leisure centre in Cranley. And I was talking this afternoon to my colleague.
Councillor Williams, please stop now. Item 6 is questions from members of the public. I understand we have one question from Mr. Daniel Hussaini, who I understand is here and wishes to read out his question. Mr. Hussaini? You have 4 minutes from when you start speaking, and you press the button in front of you.
Hi, thanks. To the Leader of the Council. Thousands of residents are concerned at the level of expenditure thus far and the future funding being committed to the Central Godalming Regeneration Project. They are concerned that serious amounts of expenditure are being committed to a scheme which is deeply unpopular and is detrimental to residents of Godalming and the surrounding villages, and to the businesses in Godalming as well. Would the Leader please provide the expenditure amount to date on the Central Godalming Regeneration Project, broken down into external costs with consultants and the like, internal costs of officer time and the like, advise how much of the 164,000 approved by full council on 18th July 2022 has been spent, together with an analysis of that expenditure. Advise whether the administration still expects to seek further funding from full council in December, as proposed in the project timeline given to full council on 18th July 2022. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hussaini. Leader, do you wish to answer that yourself, or do you wish to hand it to a portfolio holder?
And with your consent, Mr. Mayor, may I hand over to the portfolio holder for finance?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, Mr. Hussaini. I think we've met before at the drop-in session, so it's nice to see you. You're very welcome, and thank you for the question. Just by way of background, especially for our non-Godalming members here and observers, we're currently engaging with residents on in principle concepts and options for a project that, if it progresses, would see a one-off capital investment by us in our existing offices and some new housing that will pay for itself and generate other recurring annual benefits, both financial and otherwise, for us and our residents. This is a project that's come to us before as this preparatory work's progressed, and members will have seen just one face of the current engagement in the public exhibition in the lobby of the council offices. I also gave a fuller update on that in my response to another public question to the executive on the 4th of October, which is reproduced on pages 36 to 38 of this evening's agenda pack, which I really encourage you to study. In the introduction to his question, Mr. Hussaini does make some contextual claims that themselves invite some scrutiny, that the project is deeply unpopular with thousands of residents who consider it to be detrimental to every resident of Godalming and the surrounding villages and to the town's entire business community too. Now, I don't know what evidence Mr. Hussaini has to support those claims, and in the interest of transparency, I invite him and I very much hope he'll be able to share whatever that evidence is with us so that we can reflect it in the feedback that we'll be sharing with residents. Some may be surprised that we actually share many of the concerns being expressed, and especially regarding the Crown Court car park, which is precisely why we've taken a cautious step-by-step approach to this project and included such unprecedented engagement. But it's those concerns that we're seeing, the concerns we're seeing are neither binary nor consistent, either for the project's individual elements or across the project as a whole, although residents do seem to recognize that the status quo here is not a sustainable option, and it would be irresponsible of us to just do nothing. The drop-in sessions have been especially valuable as we've been able to interact with residents to clarify more exactly what their perceptions of the project are and what, if anything, given the actual facts of the matter, still could be done to address them. At the same time, we've also been contacted by residents concerned about some of the unofficial canvassing and the like that they've seen regarding the project, and especially residents who believe they've been confused and even misled by disinformation that's been promoted, for example, to manipulate them into signing unofficial petitions. To quote just one example, quote, "I was encouraged to sign a petition against the proposed development by misleading information. In hindsight, I would not have signed it," unquote. The Godalming project is self-evidently a significant, sensitive and complex one. And so it's only appropriate that the identification and evaluation of the concepts and options that it's generated be objective and thorough. To their credit, it was our Conservative colleagues that started the work on it. But because they were exploring options that could have seen the council sell these sites, including the Crown Court car park, to private developers with absolutely no regard to car parking whatsoever, we acted straight away to rule that out completely. Also to their credit, our Conservative colleagues recognised the necessity of the kind of preparatory homework that we're doing now, and they established a property investment reserve, which earmarked approximately £2 million precisely for such one-off costs. Although their plan was to borrow upwards of £100 million to fund commercial property investments, our approach is to find better and more sustainable projects that do more than just generate the independent recurring income, which we all agree we need to deal with the unavoidable external pressures that we face. And so it's from that reserve that this council approved and spent on this project a total of £65,525 on the initial phases of the project prior to the current one. And it's also from this reserve that this council approved the £164,000 for the current phase 3 work, of which only £7,525 has been spent so far in the design and printing of the engagement exhibition boards. In line with the council's approval, the remainder of that funding is intended for further potential engagement and ultimately the development of the in-principle concepts and options into formal proposals that not only reflect the results of the engagement, but also will still be subject to further public consultation, scrutiny, and approval. For completeness, the figures I've just quoted are external costs for the consultants and the like, and internally, we do not have officers dedicated full-time to this project, and rather the project team is drawn from officers from across the council as appropriate, with a diverse range of responsibilities that are incompatible with task-specific timekeeping. Since phase 3 was only approved in July and the engagement remains open, it would be premature to update further now on our expectations on seeking further funding for post-phase 3 work, other than to remark on timing. The current engagement has been extended, not only because of the mourning for Her late Majesty, but also to give all those who want to engage that opportunity. But we're also acutely aware that since July, this country's economy has been damaged farther and faster than anyone apparently imagined possible, and we cannot rule out that the relevant economic fundamentals may impact on this project as well. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you, Councillor. We now move on to, questions from members. And we have a question from Councillor Brian Edmonds, who is not here. So would the portfolio holder, Councillor Mirrlees, be kind enough to read his question and her doubtless succinct answer? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The question from Councillor Edmonds. Now that small and medium companies have recovered their COVID losses from their business interruption insurance, please could the council and Waverley Borough residents be advised of the amount of Waverley Borough Council Leisure Centre COVID losses that have been recovered on their behalf from Waverley Borough Council's business interruption insurance, and if there is any residue loss that has been changed, the Borough Council resident has been charged the Borough Council resident council taxpayers. And the response to this is the net cost to the council's budget in 2020-21 was contained within the amount approved by council in August 2020 and was not passed on to the council taxpayer. The estimated cost was agreed in an exempt section of the report to council due to its commercial sensitivity. External legal advice confirmed that the council's contract with its leisure operator requires the council to compensate for financial impact arising from a change of law, and terms were agreed through negotiation. Because the council is not the operator of the leisure centres, the council does not have business interruption insurance, but the leisure operator does. They continue to push their claim, but this is still subject to final clarification from their broker. Waverley has recovered part of the loss from government COVID compensation scheme. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mirrlees. We move on to item 8, motions, and I understand that no motions have been received. So we will then move on to item 9, minutes of the executive, and I would invite the leader to introduce the minutes of the executive.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sure you can hear me. There we go. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's my pleasure to introduce the minutes of the meeting of the 18th of July, 6th of September and 4th of October. And I believe I have a seconder.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. And the item for discussion tonight, item 9.1, the Climate Change and Sustainability Supplementary Planning Document, or SPD. This I'd like to propose that now, and I also believe I have a seconder.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. This document has been, I think, rattling around for a little while, and many of us have read several iterations over the course of the last few months. This brings much needed planning rigor to the ideas of climate and sustainability, and it is also something that we have had to make sure fits within the policy envelope of Local Plan Part 1. I do want to thank the officers and members who have worked on this. This has been many officers and a number of members who have input into this. I particularly want to thank Councillor Townsend and Councillor Williams, but also Councillor Darcy for his input into this, and the officers that have actually worked very hard to make sure this is the document that it is today. I do feel, and I feel obliged to say, there are a number of us here who would like to go a great deal further in ensuring that there is climate and sustainability policy within the planning system more generally and here at Waverley Borough Council. But I will just have to say one further time that we are limited as to what we can put in such a supplementary planning document, because it must be within that policy envelope of Local Plan Part 1. And I do believe at the moment that we are seeing a reduction in government support in the national planning policy sphere for policies like this. So it is us doing our best within the policy envelope and the system that we have. And with that, Mr. Mayor, I commend it to Council.
Councillors, do I have any speakers? Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I fully support the intent of this SPD. It contains many good things and it looks good. However, the progression from pre-consultation version to the final version has been fundamentally lazy in a few places. I say this because Services ONS and several parish council made points that have either not been addressed or have been addressed half-heartedly. So firstly, the presentation of the document leaves it looking like a consultant's product and not a Waverley document. It looks completely different to the Dunsfold Park SPD, which looks completely different to the Affordable Housing SPD, which actually looked like a Waverley document. This is a chance lost to enforce the Waverley brand. I accept this isn't critical, but it is a chance missed to enforce, to pick up some low-hanging fruit. Secondly, the consultant was asked to make a clearer distinction between requirements and guidance. While some of the language has been made tighter to identify what is guidance and what is requirement, perilously little has been done to segregate requirements which must be followed from guidance, which is nice to have. You get items like 3.6 on page 74 of our papers, where the item starts with a requirement and is then followed by two subsidiary bullets that are both guidance. The whole document is littered with interspersed requirements and guidance, and in places simple statements which are neither guidance nor requirements. This reduces the ease with which the document can be used and thus its ultimate impact. And then thirdly, and this is substance rather than style, it was suggested that some mention be given to asking developers to try and locate utilities in developments in readily accessible locations so that they can be easily accessed should any repairs be required. This has been completely ignored, not even the courtesy of a polite explanation as to why the suggestion should not be included if that's the case. Look at the misery the utility companies cause when repairing their aged infrastructure that is often located down the middle of roads and all the associated emissions that go with the traffic jams they cause. There may be no easy wins here, I accept that, but developers should at least be asked to think about the problem rather than being allowed to take the easiest and cheapest solutions. So, I mean, in summary, I'll be supporting this document wholeheartedly, or supporting the adoption of it, because it's needed and most of the content is good. Its impact will be diminished because of the points I've raised, but a suboptimum document is better than no document at all. My comments have been offered in a constructive spirit, and I hope that they will be noted for use in any future revisions of the SPD and for any future SPDs. We pay a lot of money to our consultants to produce these documents, and I believe we should be entitled to a little better value than we've received here. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any other speakers apart from councillors William and Townsend? Peter Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support everything that Councillor Seaborn has just said, but could I just ask one additional question? And that is, does this apply not only to new builds, but also to modifications and proposals from householders to build extensions to their homes? Page 65 of our papers clearly says that the pattern of development, that this SPD will apply to allocated, and then it lists the allocated sites and non-allocated sites. I just wonder what the position is with modifications and extensions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I next have Councillor Williams, followed by Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just really wanted to pick up the substantive comment of Councillor Seaborn regarding requirements as opposed to guidance, and the fact that they are interspersed. And I think, as the leader pointed out at the outset, this document, I think, is as good as it can get in the circumstances. We would have liked to have been able to have pushed the frontiers of what we are expecting developers to do even further. But we have incorporated as much as we can into this plan, so that even where it cannot specify what developers must do, we can at least be clear on what developers should do and what they could do. And I think, as a document, as I say, it's in the context of a national planning policy framework and a local plan, part 1, particularly CC1 and CC2, which leave a lot to be desired. And I think it does the best we possibly can do with regard to a supplementary planning document at this point in time. And I'd like to thank the officers and our consultants and all those who've been involved in the process of bringing this plan together right from the start, and not least my colleague, Councillor Townsend. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Townsend, I've had an indication from Councillor Hyman. You are the seconder. Do you wish to speak now or after him?
Happy to speak after him, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you. And yes, I do agree a great deal with what Councillor Seaborn has said, and others, unfortunately. Obviously well intended and an awful lot of work gone into it, and some of it looks very good, and there is some very good content there. But it is not a sustainability SPD. If I ask you to turn to page 158, which is towards the very end of the documents for the SPD, paragraph 1.26. You can all read this at home and perhaps memorize it. I've referred to this at the executive meeting, but unfortunately it was ignored, denied, whatever. It's only when it's sufficiently certain that a measure will make an effective contribution to avoiding harm to the integrity of site concerned by guaranteeing beyond all reasonable doubt that the plan or project issue will not adversely affect the integrity of the site, that the measure may be taken into consideration in an appropriate assessment. And that is part of this document, and yet it is completely ignored by it, because this document does not ensure that that is adhered to. Obviously, therefore, I can't support this document. It completely omits and evades any consideration of what is the single biggest planning constraint in respect of sustainability. It supposedly covers policy NE1. The document says it does, and the officer report says it does, which addresses the Weldon Heath SPA, but it provides no guidance in there on the application of the law that tells you what we must do, and of course there is that guidance in.
Councillor Hyman, can I just interrupt you for a sec? Which clause were you addressing? Because there seems to be a bit of confusion up here.
126 on page 158.
Thank you very much. Sorry to interrupt you.
No problem at all. Thank you, Mayor. The TBH SPA strategy is not addressed NE3. policy NE3, which has been discredited and out of date since the 2018 People Over Wind ruling. So this perpetuates the many vested interests blatant disregard for regulations on environmental protection. It must be very difficult for our residents to understand why this administration appears so keen to support the junking of protections under Habitat's EIA, air quality, water quality and flood risk legislation. Do we, or do we not, oppose the new Chancellor's apparent desire to water down and remove the regulations? If so, why are we ignoring them? The constraints don't prevent all development, but it's got to be limited according to the evidence base. And if we applied it correctly through an SPD like this, where it should be done, then we do not need to take Woking's unmet need. We don't therefore have a lack of 5-year housing land supply, solving the borough's single main planning problems very easily. And the law requires us to do that. I don't understand why members are so keen not to. The whole of the borough has that protection, but this council is saying no thanks. This makes no sense. This SPD it's not just a matter of what isn't in there, it's also what is in there. There are lots of shoulds and coulds that we've heard about, but very few musts. And if I refer you to page 108, finally, please, 108 of the document, which is the very last of the pages of the checklist, which developers have got to go through all of this that we've put in front of them, not knowing whether they should pay, whether they should pay attention to it or not. See that there, the second one down is large development is located within 10 minutes, 800-metre walk from a railway station. If we use that to make our planning decisions, then we'll be laughed at appeal. It certainly won't hold any water. This has got to be rewritten because we can't give this to people who are, we cannot expect developers, some of them householders, putting in household applications, having to wade through this as well as the MPPF, NPPG and LPP1 and all the rest. Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me just to finish. We're forcing applicants to wade through this, and it's well intended, but a minefield for everyone. I'm afraid I can't support it.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Unfortunately, this is a supplementary planning document. It isn't policy. It can only create guidance, set out exemplar development, and set expectations for developers for what Waverley would like to see built within the borough. In order to achieve what Councillor Hyman is going for, you would be looking at a whole new local plan, which we are not in a position to do at this stage. We are doing the next best thing. This is about how development is built. It's not about where it's built or how many properties are built. It does not affect the quantum of development. I can assure Councillor Martin that their extensions are covered within the SPD, and he can look at page 89 where it refers to extensions, and also on the checklist where it is on page 115 where extensions are referred to. This is a document produced by experts. Land use consultants are experts in both fields of sustainability and of planning, and they were appointed to produce this document. There is a checklist available. Obviously, the checklist is guidance. It is not for every single box to be ticked. We are all very aware of where railway stations are in the borough. It covers and builds on the policies within the Local Plan Part 1, which is policies CC1, CC2 and CC3, and also ST1 to do with sustainable transports. As you can see, it covers topics such as minimising energy, and that is really important in these times that we find ourselves in. It covers water efficiency, again, a very important topic as well. It does not cover the number of properties that are built. I must say that talking about, you know, the details of impact on the environment, and that this is an SPD which is going to improve the quality of homes that are built within the borough. I would also draw attention to the fact that within the documents as well, there is the screening opinion with regard to the need for a strategic environmental assessment, and also with regard to the habitats regulation assessment. And for clarity, I would like to add that the HRA conclusion is that the sustainability SPD will not result in likely significant effects on any European site, either along or in combination with any other plans or programmes. And therefore, an appropriate assessment is not required. This is because, as I said, the SPD will not result in development and instead seeks to minimise potential negative environmental impacts of development and to maximise positive environmental impacts. And this is a positive step forward for us, and I would urge the council to adopt this SPD. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, councillor. I see no more hands. Leader, would you like to sum up?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Other councillors have dealt with a number of the queries, but just to go through, share your misery with the utilities. For those county councillors yesterday who were in a meeting with highways, there are clearly a number of root causes as to how utility matters can get where they are in roads, highways, and various other elements to do with planning, development, and highways. There is only so much we can do with this, but I think we'll take on board any comments for any further revisions. I mean, this is a document that we hopefully will pass tonight, but it is possible to amend it going forward and to look at it going forward. So take those on board. Councillor Martin, Councillor Townsend has covered the substance of the comment. As far as I can see, this is used in the same way as local and neighbourhood planning policy and guidance is applied to development more generally. But thank you for raising the point. I think it's clearer for us all now with Councillor Townsend's clarifications. Councillor Hyman, Councillor Townsend has dealt with the matter of appropriate assessments. I believe you are also asking me again later anyway, so I'm sure I'll come back to that one. Waverley obviously challenged the matter of unmet need in court several years ago and lost. I just didn't like that judgment. I still don't, but I'm not a judge and I'm not a planning lawyer. And that was the judgment, and I'm not qualified to say otherwise. As Councillor Townsend alluded to, we can only achieve what you were asking for there with a full review of local plan. And to do this, as we've said a number of times, we would have to actually then deploy the current standard methodology, which would materially increase the housing number requirements across the borough. So even if what you were talking about was something that was actually backed up with a legal counsel opinion, I actually still would attest that the cost of doing that would be too high anyway. We would get a ridiculous number of housing out of that equation, and it would be unsustainable in lots of different ways. So to conclude, I'll just repeat Councillor Townsend's word that this is an SPD that will help improve the quality and sustainability of homes in the borough, and my own words that this is as much as we can do within the policy envelope of LPP1. And for that reason, and for those reasons, Mr. Mayor, I again commend it to council. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. I therefore put the motion, which is written out in your report, to the vote. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much, councillors. We'll move on to part 2 items.
Sorry, may my vote against be recorded, please, Councillor Hyman?
Yes, indeed. Councillor Hyman vote against is recorded.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Will be recorded. I have one speaker registered in part 2 to speak twice. I have Councillor Hyman on the minutes of the 18th of July.
This is page 25 for members' reference. And it was the UCOG application for judicial review. It's a statement only, and I won't stray into exempt. I had noticed that the exempt paper had been accidentally left out of your committee papers at page 27, and you've been sent them yesterday. I've got a copy in front of me. If you have, you'll know what I'm talking about. As the open minutes show for this item, my concern at the meeting was members that did not know the extent of the potential financial exposure which could result. And that given that the consent is for exploration rather than extraction, and given the notable absence in the committee report of an opinion from our own borough solicitor, and given the nature of the external legal advice received, I believe that before pursuing the matter at this stage, rather than save our powder and money to fight a possible future EIA consent for extraction, then we should at least know what the borough solicitor's advice would be. My wider concern was that even if we win permission to proceed and then win the ensuing lengthy and expensive judicial review, it could all be for nothing. as the original decision could be taken again with just a minor textual amendment and could be consented with no risk of further challenge. So though I was repeatedly told at the meeting that I was wrong and that my concerns were unfounded, the Borough Solicitor confirmed that I was in fact right. The risk of exposure to costs far exceeded the 13.5 grand that members had assumed, as the potential costs, and this is in public arena, would be a further £13,000 for the Secretary of State's defence, and a further risk of perhaps the amount that the Borough Solicitor estimated for UCOG's costs, which aren't certain costs against us, but which are a risk, which are stated in the middle of the second paragraph of exempt sheet, page 27. I can't say what that is, but you can add up the 13.5 grand and the 13 grand plus the amount that's in the middle of the second paragraph for an estimate of UCOG's costs. I think the executive spent much of the exempt session then rewording recommendation 2, which is on page 26, to reflect the need to acknowledge the risks of potentially significant additional costs. The Borough Solicitor's opinion is in exempt, so I won't go there now, but I would like to emphasise that whilst on current evidence, I tend to share the new Chancellor's given view that fracking should not occur where it is not supported by residents. In the circumstances, I am very disappointed by the manner in which the Council has made its decision in this matter. Let's pray for a happy ending at minimal cost. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. I noticed this came in at 11:59 again, despite previous pleas for you to send things in a little earlier, but I hope the leader has managed in that time to drag up some form of response. But if it's not satisfactory, I'm afraid it's a little bit down to the time in which it came in.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just to add to that, I tend to do a whole day here at Waverley on a Tuesday. So if something comes in at 11:59, I have absolutely no opportunity to read the substance of any additional material during the day because of meetings that are already in the diary. Now, with this particular question, it is my understanding and confident understanding that the predominant risk of exposure to cost would be merely if we got to the second stage of this process. I have, by the way, in a separate discussion written to the Secretary of State who has responsibility for climate change, which I have to just about manage to say this, the Right Honourable Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is the one championing solar panels at the moment, which is even more ridiculous to say. I have actually written to him asking whether the opposition of Waverley Borough Council, the parishes of Alfold, Dunsfold and Chiddingfold, as well as a significant protest group called Protect Dunsfold and the Good Law Project, constitutes reasonable resident opposition to fracking as qualified by the Prime Minister when she reiterated that the government was in fact now pro-fracking unless residents opposed it locally. I have yet to receive a response to that letter and have now been chasing it. But Councillor Hyman, I do believe that the predominant risk of exposure to costs is from that second stage. And obviously if I remember the recommendation specifically, we made a decision to reserve judgment about proceeding to that second stage once we had found out whether we had been given consent to move to that stage and had then evaluated the risks and the costs of that stage separately. So I'm personally happy that this is completely above board. However, I will say if you wish to speak to myself and the Borough Solicitor separately, I'm happy to engage with you on that subject. Thank you, Councillor Hyman and Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. I have Councillor Hyman again on the minutes of the 4th of October.
Thanks. There wasn't a question in my last one, which was a statement, but I do have a question in this one. I've already referred members. This is the Fairground Development Way Hill and XE 43/22. I've already referred you to the SBD's HRA screening at page 158, which quoted the law in the Dutch nitrogen case. It's not my opinion. It is the law. It is also the council's position. It's in the council's document that those are the requirements that we need to satisfy. The problem that we have here, and in relation to this, I mean, my concern at the meeting is that we should not be spending public funds until the fundamental legal constraints have been addressed. because it all, and this applies to Godalming's regeneration and obviously a lot of other things that we're doing. We really should be making sure that we get the fundamentals right before we spend public funds. The problem in respect of habitat is that there's a very real risk that the current SANG strategy is encouraging dog ownership in the visitor catchment areas of the spas, which is the last thing the protected bird species need, and thus potentially having the opposite effect to intended. That's not my opinion. It is in the findings of a Southampton University SANG thesis conducted between 2013 and 2018 and reported to the board, to the joint board. It was done by Liz Allinson, commissioned by the Wildlife Trust for Natural England, and it's in the public domain. There's a real risk we're doing more harm than good with the current strategy. We must have an appropriate assessment demonstrating that that is not the case. We don't know whether the negative effects of the strategy outweigh the benefits of the SANGs. Natural England still cannot provide any genuine evidence of the extent to which SANGs and sand wardening are effective. And my colleague next to me was at the last meeting in June of the board, where they told us that ultimately that's their aim, to be able to provide some evidence. So we know we need it. We know we haven't got it. That's not difficult for people to understand, but some people just seem to be completely blind to it. It's this problem that could be a time bomb for protected species because of the time delay between consents and building out. We must be more careful by law. Now, I'm sure the mayor, as the conscience of the council, will have to agree that we must not continue to use public money to pay lawyers to provide false evidence to evade the environmental law that has been settled. Now, finally, I refer you to my question to last council at the bottom of page 13, which was not answered, but was evaded on the basis of lawyers' falsehoods once again. It is a yes or no question to the leader. And my question is, will the leader now admit that the council does not yet have the requisite legally compliant appropriate assessment demonstrating the effectiveness of our spa mitigation measures? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Before I call upon the leader to answer that, may I not for the first time caution you against the words such as illegal, unlawful, and other such things. And I do assure you the mayor of the conscience of the council will continue to be the conscience of the council. Leader, would you wish to reply?
Thank you, Mr. Conscience. I refer to council comments or advice that you've received on at least 4 occasions, my own comments at that executive meeting, the previous full council, and of about 7 minutes ago, and that of Councillor Townsend, that reiterates the council's position on this matter. I really don't think it's necessary for me to go through this again. I don't believe a thesis published by anybody has any particular weight in law or in public policy. And so as much as it might say some things we might like or might want to happen, it doesn't have any bearing on this. We, like all other councils, have to obey the law of the land, and the law of the land is adjudged by Parliament and by the courts. And the courts and judges have ruled on this matter, and therefore there is nothing that we can do about this. You have had that guidance from council. I refer you back to it. I will ask the borough solicitor to resend you that guidance if you can't find it, but it is very clear and it has been issued on multiple occasions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
May I make a point of personal explanation, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, you may, provided it is what you said today.
Thank you. The leader has just referred to an opinion of October 2018 by Mr. Wayne Beglin, who stated that the council does have an appropriate assessment. That statement has always been proven to be incorrect because it cannot be provided, and that there's an appropriate assessment that is compliant with the legislation and the court rulings. So my question was very simply, will the leader admit the council does not yet have it? Can I take it that the answer to that is no, the leader will not admit that we don't have one? Because we don't.
I don't think we need you to respond any further, leader. I think you have responded, and I am not comfortable with words being put in other councillors' mouths. We will move to item 10, which was use of an emergency procedure for a key decision. This is an item purely for noting and not for discussion. but I must ask the leader formally to move that the report be received and noted and produce a seconder.
I do so move that report, Mr. Mayor, and I believe I have a seconder.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, councillors. Council, can we agree? I should backtrack slightly and say, do you agree to receive the notes and minutes of the executive? And I'll roll it into this one and say, do you agree to receive this report and note it? Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much indeed. Councillors, we have an interesting small problem with the minutes of the Audit Committee, in that both the chairman of the Audit Committee and the vice chairman are not available. But I have councillors Richard Seaborn, Julian Spence and George Wilson, all of whom were at the relevant meeting. And since there are no items for decision and no speakers on part 2, I trust that one of you will be prepared to propose them and the other second them. I will leave you to squabble for who does what. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I propose that they are accepted. Have I got a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Seaborn.
Yeah, happy to second.
Thank you very much. Council, is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Item 12 is minutes of the Standards and General Purposes Committee, and I will call upon the chairman, Councillor Rabini.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to present the minutes of the meeting of the Standards and General Purposes Committee held on the 3rd of October and move that the minutes be received and noted. I have a seconder, I believe.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We'll move on, introduce the 2-part 1 items for council decision. So first of all, the review under 12.1 of the Waverley Constitution. I would like to actually thank, before I started, the officers and in particular Fiona Cameron for producing this document. We all know what the document looks like. It's huge. There was a lot of work went into, so I would like to thank them for all that work that they did. The Standards and General Purposes Committee recommends to Council that the revised Waverley Constitution, parts 1 to 4, is approved and adopted. The revised Constitution has been drafted following an extensive review of the current Constitution by officers. The aim of the review has been to address errors and omissions that have been identified that have crept in over the last 20 years, to reduce repetition between the different parts of the Constitution, to improve navigation and usability, and to improve accessibility. Whilst there are a lot of textual changes, which make a tracked changes version of the document very difficult to read, there are relatively few substantive changes, and these are set out in the annex to report at page 189. Now, I'd like to draw Councillors' attention, please, to one proposed change relating to the membership of the planning committees that the standards discussed in some detail, and we did have quite a discussion on this. It is proposed to change the composition of the planning committee's membership so that it reflects the political proportionality of the council as a whole, rather than the political proportionality of the wards covered by the respective committees. This revision was narrowly agreed by the Standards Committee. However, having had feedback from councillors across all groups, I would like to propose an amendment, and that we retain the current arrangement of the planning committees so that the membership reflects the political proportionality of the wards covered by that committee. And as you know, it really was a very tight vote. So do I have a seconder for that amendment, please?
I'm happy to second, Mr. Chairman, especially as I drafted the amendment.
Thank you very much, Councillor Goodrich.
Could I speak as a seconder on it, please, Mr. Mayor?
Of course.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, if you refer to page 182, it sets out the arguments at the lower part of that page about Eastern and Western planning. And the amendment that I put forward was to make clear on two things, which I believe the chairman is accepting. Such members members of the committees only to come from the wards covered by each committee, as it is at the moment, and the political balance of the area covered by each committee. And I'm delighted that the chairman is prepared to do a U-turn on this matter, because if not, we would have started the thin edge of the wedge to start introducing development plans A and B, which we had on this council 10 years or more, which were very unpopular by the electorate because we didn't have local councillors deciding local issues. I know that the committee talked about they're trying to get some consistency in planning between Eastern and Western. And to be frank, the only way that's going to happen is if we reintroduce joint planning committees, the joint planning committee for major planning applications. And that is not being proposed at the moment. But if consistency is required between Eastern and Western, that would be, in my view, the only way that that could be achieved. So I'm delighted that the chairman is prepared to preserve the status quo, and therefore I don't have to put my motion to the council.
Councillors, do I have any speakers specifically to that amendment? Councillor Coburn.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I'm delighted, surprised but delighted. I did watch the webcast just to see what was said, and I couldn't actually follow the argument as to why you were going to have the change, to be perfectly honest. To me, there weren't any particularly good reasons for the change at all. And all the reasons I could see for this sort of change were poor. In fact, you, Mr. Chairman, were thrilled to bits to vote against, to vote for the other motion twice. But I'm delighted you've had a change of heart. Apart from anything else, apart from the fact I just think it's bad to take away all democracy from planning. I just think there has to be an element of democracy in planning, even though planning is policy-led. I think it's important that people know that we understand the context. Because if you read the MPPF, we're looking at place, not at just one site, we're looking at context. And context is character, and who knows the character best? The local members for whichever part they represent. So I'm delighted that you are not flourishing your arms again in voting for the other arrangement, which I thought was quite appalling. As I say, completely, as far as I could see, not backed up with evidence. And I fully support your change of heart, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Munro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just a personal statement, really. I was rather disconcerted to read that if the amendment had passed, then I would have been put on Western planning. So thank you very much for giving me some more spare evenings. But seriously, a more serious point, it does give me and others who are not on these planning committees rather more freedom to act as advocates for residents whom we represent. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. We would have been delighted to have you, of course. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, are we just speaking to the amendment at the moment? We're only speaking to the amendment.
Absolutely correct. We are speaking just to the amendment.
Thank you. This, of course, is the single most controversial proposal that's coming out of the revision to the Constitution. I'm very concerned that it was not identified in Annex 1 Schedule of Changes, which provided to the Standards and General Purposes Committee. It had a similar list to what we've got on page 189 and the following pages. But it wasn't in there. Also, if you saw the wording of the old Constitution, the one we're still under effectively for the time being today.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor, this is not speaking to the amendment.
Well, the problem is that the wording, and I want to know exactly what the wording is, and I was hoping that that we avoid the issue that we've got. May I explain myself, and so that you know, because I have received a copy of the track changes. I don't know whether anybody else has been through it all. I have been through the lot.
Councillor Hyman, the motion really is quite simple, is that we maintain the status quo. I cannot put it clearer or more succinctly.
Yes, well, that's why I'm trying to explain there's a problem with that I can see, which I'm not sure other people can see. And that's because I've got the old words and the new words in front of me, which other people cannot see. Am I allowed to read them and explain where there may be a problem here?
Councillor Hyman, you have 4 minutes and you're using your time up as you wish.
Oh, okay, so I am allowed. Sorry, you'd stopped me. So if you want to stop me but keep the clock running, then that's great, isn't it? Anyway, Mr. Mayor, the current constitution says the Eastern and Western Planning Committees will each comprise 15 members appointed on a politically proportional basis. The new proposal that was in there says the Eastern and Western Planning Committees will each comprise 15 members and 8 reserve members in political balance. Now, I can't see the difference between those, and I can't see how the change came about. And unless we make things absolutely clear, I do not see how we're going to not have this come up again. And I don't have in front of me the wording that is being proposed, and I'd like to see the exact.
Councillor Goodrich, is that a point of order?
Well, a point of information, Mr. Mayor, because my resolution had the wording very precise, which I gave to Head of Democratic Services earlier this afternoon, which reads, so that it's clear, which I'd be grateful if the chairman could confirm he agrees this wording, which says the Eastern and Western Planning Committees will each comprise 15 members and 8 reserve members, bracket, and this is an addition, such members to only come from the wards covered by each committee, close bracket, in political balance, and then now another addition, of the area covered by each committee. And then it finishes the same wording to the end. That is what I've seconded, and that's what I believe the chairman is proposing.
Leader, do you wish to make a point?
I'm going to have to find the exact clause, but it's my understanding that in the actual scheme of delegation, it already says that there is a requirement for them to come from the region of Eastern or Western as an overarching requirement. So I agree with Councillor Goodrich's intent, absolutely, but I think it's already in the Constitution and isn't required to be done, which is why I thought that the amendment here was merely to revert to the status quo of the Constitution that we've been acting under for some time.
Okay, thank you, Leader. Councillor Hyman, I will give you another 30 seconds.
Well, thanks. I mean, there is a problem here that we don't identify any changes that are in the moving and tidying many sections, but there's one particular other area I think is a great worry. On page 227, part 2, article 14.2, there's a new clause whereby the monitoring officer can make changes without report. So
you are straying off the amendment, Councillor Hyman.
Oh, sorry,
so I will stop
I apologise.
you there. Thank you very much. That's
You're quite
enough.
right. I was not speaking to the amendment.
That is
I
enough.
apologise.
Can I ask the chairman of the Standards Committee? I don't see a sea of confused faces in front of me, but if there is some confusion, would the chairman of Standards be content with his vice chairman's suggestion of the wording?
I am very content with that. Thank you very much. And as the leader pointed out, we are going back to what it used to be. So I am quite content that things will remain as the status quo. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak before I ask the Standards Chairman to sum up? Councillor Rubini.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Just the amendment, Councillor, and let's get that out of the way.
Okay, so if we could vote on the amendment, please. And then I'll pass it back to you. So,
okay, can I deal with it, please?
Yep.
You've all heard the amendment succinctly put. Those in favour, please. Any against? Thank you. Okay, Councillor Rubini, let's crack on with the next bit.
I'll pass back to you, Mr. Mayor, with a recommendation to Council that the revised Waverley Constitution, as amended, is approved and adopted. Do you want to speak on that?
Councillor Goodrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have another amendment which I've given notice to the Democratic Services this afternoon, which relates to an amendment to the procedure rule 11.8A, which you will find on page 330 of the House Council agenda, which I am proposing, and I have a seconder for the amendment.
I'm happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
You will see from page 182 that this again was debated. It does say on our agenda paper it was 11.8B, but actually it should read A, if it makes any sense. And the amendment that was put at the Standards Committee was trying to ensure that officers and members of the executive had more than from 12 o'clock on the day of the meeting or 11:59 from the day of the meeting to 6 o'clock to get answers to questions. Oh, it's up there. Excellent. I don't argue with that. But this clause also covers statements. And if a councillor wishes to make a statement, as it's been amended at the moment, you've got to give it by 12 noon on the working day before. I see absolutely no reason whatsoever why we can't do statements, which would be on the old part 2, by 12 o'clock of the day of the meeting, and hence the amendment. And a lot of the groups used to, and some still do, so they're up to date, have group meetings the evening before a council meeting. And if we have to give notice at 12 o'clock before we have our group meeting, it produces a nonsense. I know what will happen. What will happen is, if in doubt, give notice. So we just give notice to everything and everybody does it. And then we tell the mayor on the day of the meeting, well, we don't want to actually speak on that anymore, but just to be safe, I gave notice. It is not something which is going to take time for officers or members of the executive. All the officers have got to do is list those councillors that want to speak on which item. That is all. And therefore, I wish to distinguish between statements and questions. I'm happy with the idea of statements, questions being an extra day in advance, but not statements. And therefore, I propose formally this amendment as seen on the screen.
Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to ignore the sections about referring to effectively inconveniencing your group meeting as not being material to the debate and stick to the principle. I actually agree with the substance of this amendment to the point that I will support it, because the principle, I believe, is correct. It should have nothing to do with any individual group's meeting or about when they sit and debate anything. That has nothing to do with the council and how it sits. But in terms of the principle, I think we've demonstrated today why it's important that questions get to council, ideally, at least the day before, because speaking just for myself here, I'd like to be able to answer them in good faith and as fully as possible with reasonable preparation, and ideally responding in writing to that member as well. So I completely agree with questions. Statements, realistically, there's nothing to respond to and no expectation from any member here that a full and written response be given from any member of the executive or any officer or anybody else, in fact. And if they wanted to put in such a statement that required a question, they do so in due course. So I actually support this amendment completely and will happily vote for it. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Do I have any other speakers to the amendment? Councillor Hyman.
Yes, thanks. Actually, I think that we could keep everybody happy if it was by 9 a.m. rather than noon on that day for answers. It would give them the whole day. But bear in mind that we as councillors are disadvantaged here, because any member of the public, if I didn't come to this meeting but decided to turn up as a member of the public, I could ask an informal question, and so could any number of people who turned up, ask informal questions from the gallery and expect answers from people. But as a councillor, we can't. We can't do that. So, to expect an answer, there is in our constitution, it does allow for not being able to answer a question there and then necessarily, because you can give a written answer and whatever. That's there in our constitution. So I don't see why there's a problem with this. It's just that people want more time to be able to come up with an answer or to get advice. Well, the public that we represent seem to have it much easier than we do. I just thought that if it was by 9 AM of the meeting to get a question in, that gives all day to put together an answer. And it does mean that where there's a group meeting on a Monday evening, they can get their question together, as they always have done in the past, and can have that in by 9 o'clock the next morning. And it solves all of the problems. But of course, I'm not sure people want the problem to be solved. But that is what I would recommend. And if someone else wants to move it, I won't bother myself. But
we don't move an amendment to an amendment, councillor, as I'm sure you're more than well aware. And I would like to put the amendment to the vote unless there are any other speakers.
The seconder would like to say something.
Delighted.
And may I say how delighted I am to agree wholeheartedly with Councillor Follows on something. Councillor Goodrich has summarised the difference, and I think this is the perfect answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mullen. Do you wish to do anything, Chairman of Standards, or sorry, yes, just Standards still, isn't it?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I'm content with that amendment.
Okay, you've all heard the amendment. It's up on the board for you. Can I take it that council is going to be happy? Anyone against? Thank you very much. Right. Main part of the agenda of the meeting then, Councillor Rabini.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is now the amendments to the scheme of delegation.
Sorry, hang on. We need to take a vote. No, sorry. We need to take a vote on the changes to the Constitution. We've only voted on the 2 amendments. So if anyone wishes to speak to the main Constitution, if not, I will move it to the vote. Councillor Hyman, followed by Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, page 227, part 2, Article 14.2B1. We're on, which I don't have right in front of me at this second because I forgot to turn to it. Tells us that, well, if you look at the wording of both 1 and 2 there, then they need doing. So we might want to get to delegate that. It needs sorting out, that does. But that clause allows the monitoring officer, it's a new clause, can make changes without report. So in future, councillors and residents can never be sure what the Constitution actually says. And as a matter of principle, there must be a public written record of any and all changes made to the Constitution. Otherwise, why have a Constitution? The law requires it, it must be public, and therefore it follows that the law requires that we know what it says. And that the allowance there for the monitoring officer to make minor, but whatever, they are changes to the Constitution without report. It is unacceptable as far as I'm concerned in principle. I think we have to have a piece of paper at the next council meeting or whatever telling us what it was, and we have to have something attached to the Constitution as an amendment, even if it's just typos and whatever. We need to know that it has been changed. So the problem I think that we've got here on a wider level with this document, having been through it all, is that we cannot be sure what changes we are being asked to agree. And this is, of course, contrary to the principles of proper decision making in Article 13 of the current Constitution, Article 12 of the new Constitution. So I do have a problem with this. I do not know what was there. I went to the standards meeting without knowing that there was a bombshell of a change, changes to the way the planning committees were organised, hidden away, that no one could possibly find or know about. So I am concerned we don't necessarily know what we are being asked to agree. I don't think any member here can say they are. There's a particular problem with the scheme of delegation, which is in this. I've raised this before. The scheme of delegation in the Constitution is one version, version 7. The scheme of delegation that we are going to be asked to agree in the next item that comes up is a later different version, 7.1, but it's a track changes version, which we shouldn't be doing. So, there's a lot of things that need sorting out. I've got 2 pages of notes of things that need sorting out. A lot of work's gone into tidying it up, but it hasn't been done. It's not finished, and it shouldn't really be in front of us quite yet. And so, I don't know how to vote on this because I don't really want to vote against it, but as a matter of constitution, can officers confirm, can we adopt a constitution unconstitutionally? Because I don't think we can. Article 13 requires we know what we're doing, and we don't, because we don't know what all the changes are and the reasons for them. So could officers please confirm, are we allowed constitutionally, are we allowed to adopt a constitution unconstitutionally, i.e. without knowing what's being changed?
Right, have you finished, Councillor Hyman? I'm not going to put questions to officers at this meeting. Any changes that the monitoring officer wishes to make are quite clearly restricted within the Constitution, and we are being asked to approve this Constitution that's in front of us, not the changes to something that existed before. So if you're not happy with the Constitution in front of you, you may choose how you vote, and if you are happy, you may also choose how you vote. I've had indications from both the leader and the leader of the opposition. Are they points of order or long speeches?
Well, I hope I never give long speeches. You limit me to 4 minutes, Mr. Mayor. But this is an unusual day. I can agree with both Councillor Follows and with Councillor Hyman on the same evening. I think Councillor Hyman has a point, because the drafting of this is a little careless. What it should say is the monitoring officer may generally update the Constitution to correct errors or to reflect changes in legislation, or make amendments consequential upon changes to operational arrangements. That's the difficult one. Without prior report, not just without report, subject to consultation with the executive portfolio holder with responsibility for governance, and prompt report of the changes to the full council. Councillor Hyman is entirely right. We need to see what has been changed. It will always be for good reasons. But you cannot have a situation where in a document of this length, I mean, how many members here have actually read every page of it? And so it's that third thing. If changes in legislation, no problem at all. Amendments consequential upon changes to operational arrangements is quite open-ended. I don't know really what it means. An operational arrangement could cover a whole range of things happening among the officers. So I would be much more comfortable if Councillor Hyman's point was recognised as being entirely fair, that the first reference to report, or the only reference, should be without prior report. In short, they don't have to bring a report to us to get the change made. But after that, we should be told what has changed. So if I could move an amendment, Mr. Mayor, if the council as a whole felt sympathetic to the point that I'm making, it would simply be to insert the one word prior before the word report, and to add at the end, because the subject to clause, and prompt report of the changes to the full council. Then Councillor Hyman's concern would be met.
May I second? Do you have a seconder?
Mr. Mayor, I will second if it helps.
Thank you, Leader, and you were indicating to speak.
So I actually don't think it's completely necessary, but if it helps people sleep better, then fair enough. I think the rationale is explained in the accompanying annex. Monitoring officer has delegated authority to make minor or editorial changes, which, by the way, is something that we give to senior staff on practically everything, so that they can go around and make the changes as necessary. Arising from changes in legislation, i.e. things that if we disagree with, we couldn't make any difference anyway, because it's from legislation, or operational arrangements, e.g. management restructure. So in other words, where it refers to a title that is now redundant or is unused anymore, it's updated to reflect the one that does. So the sorts of things that are articulated as being without prior report are very clear, very limited, and extremely basic, or not subject to challenge anyway. However, if it makes everybody feel better to have the word prior in there so that there is a report of any changes that come forward after, I'm not going to sit and oppose that. In fact, I'm going to second it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. Chairman of Standards, do you wish to comment or can I put that to the vote?
I think we can put that to the vote. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. A very lucid and hopefully happily short amendment has been put before you. Is that agreed, councillors? Is anyone against? Okay, can I now put to you the main item, which is to agree. Sorry, Councillor Seaborn, do you wish to speak?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. You had noted that I wish to speak, so I will if I may. A couple of further small points, and I apologise, these are last minute. It's due to holidays and house hunting. These probably could have been dealt with earlier, but there are a couple of points of ambiguity I picked up in reading through it. Firstly, on page 212 of paragraph 7.2b4, we are introduced to the term joint chief officers. Nowhere in the document is the term joint chief officers actually defined. The term chief officers is defined on page 241, which is some 30 pages later, but it's good practice to either define a term when it first appears or to include a reference to a subsequent part of the document where the term is defined. So I think we ought to be looking at an addition on page 212, either of a definition of the joint chief officers or a reference to the page 244 where chief officers are defined. Otherwise, you're actually reading this and not knowing who the joint chief officers are. So that's point one. And then secondly, in table 2 on page 236, in the first line, which covers the audit committee, it's stated that the functions covered include financial governance. It's been accepted for some time that the audit committee addresses corporate governance rather than just financial governance, and that's reflected in the committee's terms of reference on page 244. So I would suggest that the word financial should be changed to corporate in order to align table 2 with the committee's terms of reference. These are small points, but they are points of which I think would improve the document. I guess the way business is being conducted, I probably need to put forward a motion to amend the document.
I don't think it is so minor. I don't think you need to, Councillor. It's been suggested to me that to fix your first point, we just remove the word joint, and that is then dealt with. And I think putting corporate in can fit neatly under the minor parts of the monitoring officer. If the chairman is happy to accept it and the leader isn't going to violently object to it, I will suggest we move forward. But leader, you wish to speak?
No, merely to say that the amendment we just passed allows exactly the monitoring officer to go and correct exactly the sort of thing like this where it arises, and now we will also get a report afterwards telling you that it's happened. So actually this is quite straightforward, and as you say, they're editorial changes. I actually just wanted to speak on the whole item in general, just to say thank you to officers for the amount of work that's gone into this, because it's huge in a team that's been understaffed for a little while. The bulk of these changes are to reflect some things that have been out of date with the Constitution for a very long time, and also to bring it in line with some of the way that we now work with Guildford jointly, and to bring in some new roles that didn't exist, some new terms that didn't exist, and to just generally improve the document. Literally nobody here is saying that it's done forever and ever and there won't be any changes. Clearly there are going to be things that are minor that need to be altered, and possibly substantial over the years that need to be altered. But I just wanted to make sure it didn't go without saying from myself as the portfolio holder for governance that there's a lot of work that's gone into this, and I think it's a great set of changes, and I think we've actually improved it with a few amendments this evening as well. So thank you everyone, and thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Rubini, do you wish to say anything before I put this finally to the vote?
No, Mr. Mayor, as you can see, we had a healthy debate tonight, as we did at standards. So hopefully now we've got a document that makes sense, it's up to date, and I'm sure we can move ahead with it. Thank you.
Councillors, is what you have in front of you with the various amendments agreed? Agreed. Thank anyone against? Thank you very much. Let's go to item 12.2, amendments to the scheme of delegation. Councillor Rubini.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 12.2, amendments to the scheme of delegation. The scheme of delegation to officers has been updated by the monitoring officer to reflect the changes to the titles of the new joint management team and the transfer of certain services between the new service directorates. In addition to this, the committee considered requests from officers to make some substantive changes to the delegated authority of the Joint Executive Head of Planning Development. Some of these changes amounted to tidying up the scheme, but there were two more substantial changes proposed. Firstly, on page 437 of your agenda, under reference 0.5H, it is proposed to reinstate the delegated authority to allow the Joint Executive Head of Planning Development to approve planning applications submitted by members of staff or councillors, or which have another connection to employers or councillors, provided there is no other reason for the application to be brought to one of the planning committees. Colleagues will recall that this delegation was agreed on a temporary basis in 2020, when committee meetings moved online in order to reduce the number of applications to be considered by the planning committees. Planning officers reported orally to each committee on any applications that had been approved under this temporary delegation. That delegated authority expired in May 2021, when committee meetings reverted to being held in the council chamber. The committee acknowledged there is a balance to be struck between efficiency of decision making and transparency, but on balance felt that we could recommend this change to council to approve. And again, there is some debate going on in standards to prove that point. The second change proposed was also in relation to 0.5, this time concerning paragraph F on page 439 of your agenda, and the arrangements for giving ward councillors a second opportunity to call in an application committee if there have been more than 5 letters of objection or support. Officers were proposing to raise this trigger to 10 letters. However, members and the committee felt that this was likely to impact rural ward councillors more than those representing town wards, because it is likely that there will be fewer neighbours affected by any particular application, so it'd be harder to reach the 10-letter threshold. On balance, the committee decided not to recommend this change to council. So the recommendation from the Standards and General Purposes Committee is to approve the changes to delegated authority to Joint Executive Head of Planning Development as set out in the covering report and annex. Now, again, I believe I have a seconder for this.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Goodrich.
Councillors, any speakers? In that case, unless, sorry, Councillor Hyman.
Yes, but just to, I don't know whether it's a problem or not, but I should draw it to your attention, and as I did a few minutes ago, which is that we have as a council just agreed the scheme of delegation that is in the Constitution, which is dated version 7, dated 14th of September 22. But look at page 300 around that area, and you'll see at the bottom that's what it says. It's version 7. The version that we've got in front of us here under this item is version 7.1, 18th of October 22, and it has tracked changes shown in it. So we actually want to be adopting probably 7.2 with those bits removed. You know, the final version. We have some issues in this. For instance, if I ask you to turn to page 441. We're near the very end, fortunately. On page 441, you'll see the Joint Executive Head of Regulatory Services in the bottom right corner there, Q1, and you'll see that, for instance, the numbering starts at 22. I don't know why. You've got the old Environment Act 1995 at number 26, Roman numerals. And if you go over the page, you've got the Environment Act 1995 yet again at number 35, but you can't see much of the first X in there. It just concerns me that this should have been cleaned up a little bit before it came in front of us. I don't know what other problems there are, but I do know we shouldn't be agreeing different things into adjacent items. If there's an easy way of getting around that, please do it, but let's not get it wrong in our recommendation. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Leader.
Well, again, fortunately, we just agreed a clause that allows the monitoring officer to correct, and the particular element that I'm referring to here is issues regarding legislation. So if there are corrections that are required to update the document to reflect the extant legislation, the monitoring officer is empowered to do so and to provide us with a report afterwards. I just need to ask members, particularly if you've got specifics that you've gone through this document and found that they're wrong, just now announcing it in full council rather than actually proactively engaging with democratic services, me and others prior, is frankly extremely frustrating to everybody involved. And I'm trying to moderate my language, but extremely frustrated is where I am on this right now. And of course, it will be updated where there are corrections to be made. We've just empowered the monitoring officer to do that. But if I can again encourage members to highlight these things in advance if they're seeing them. In terms of the actual document itself, it again just makes necessary updates to reflect the joint Guildford and Waverley partnership. That is the majority of the purpose of this, and if there have been elements that have been missed, we've just clarified the mechanism to address them. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. Any other speakers? Councillor Mulliner.
I'll just make a very quick comment. I wonder if the time has come in this days of modernisation of abandoning Roman numerals.
Were you suggesting Greek?
Happy to be Arabic, Mr. Mayor.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, I see no more hands and I see some happy faces and a few people who would quite like to go home. Do you wish to say anything more, Councillor Rubini, or shall I put the motion to council?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to thank the committee, because this is a weighty document, and I believe most of my committee, the majority, including myself, actually read it. So please, thank you all very much for your healthy debate.
Councillors, amendments to the scheme of delegation, it is printed in your papers. Are they now agreed? Thank you very much. Is anybody against? Right, let's move on to things which I hope can proceed a little quicker. Item 13, decision of the standards panel on the 5th of September. The standards panel has to report their findings to the committee. They met and they looked at this. This is for noting only by the council. It is not a matter of debate. So I must ask the council, do they agree to note the findings? Is anyone disagreeing? Thank you very much. Moving on to item 14, yet again, a decision of the standards panel. Yet again, the same cautions. It is for noting only. Is it agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Item 15, appointment of the monitoring officer. You have the supplementary paper with you, which is recommending that Stephen Ricks be appointed monitoring officer. I wish to personally thank Robin Taylor for his work as monitoring officer. I'm amazed anybody wants to take on the job. I think it's an awful job, but well done, Stephen, for doing so. Most of you probably know that Robin Taylor has applied for and succeeded in achieving another post within the council, which he really wanted, and is very happy to find a willing volunteer to take on these responsibilities. So could we confirm agreement to this, please? Nobody against? Thank you very much. Item 16, may I welcome Councillor Jan Floyd Douglas to appearing yet again before us after a period of very bad ill health. No, but I'm putting it on record. And I realize that she will not necessarily be able to stay for the whole council. So we only have one continuing absence, which is Councillor Anne-Marie Rosserman. Sorry.
Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, on a point of information, I believe Councillor Jan has not been at a meeting, and I would hate it, the council not to give permission and find that we've got a by-election.
Yeah,
So I would
absolutely.
be grateful if she'd be included as belt and braces.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you, Councillor Goodrich. We will add her to the continuing absence agreement of the council. I was expecting her this evening, and she had said that she thought there's another microphone on somewhere. She had said that she thought she might make it, but she had also said that she did not think she'd be able to stay for the whole meeting. And I thought she'd crept out. So my apologies for not knowing that. So let us say continuing absence, Councillor Anne-Marie Robertson and Councillor Rosamond, sorry, and Councillor Jan Floyd Douglas. Is that agreed? Agreed. Okay, we're getting very much to the end. I've just saved a couple of interesting items and a couple of comments before I close the meeting. When Jeremy Hunt was, I suppose it's elevated to the Chancellorship, I sent him a text on my own behalf, personally congratulating him and on behalf of the council. And despite his busy schedule, he sent me a text back saying, thank you very much. He wasn't sure whether he was looking forward to it or not, but it was going to be hard work. I, on behalf of the council, wrote to His Majesty congratulating him on his accession. And this morning I had a note back from the King thanking me and the council for their good wishes. So thank you, councillors, for your good humour, your cooperation and cross-party love-in that occurred today, and have a pleasant journey home, and council is closed.